Let's talk about the pink tide, Nando.
Sure.
First of all, can you tell everybody, we talk about it a lot on the show, obviously, and obviously it matters a lot to the show, but how would you define them? And do you remember when you first became aware of these guys, like Chavez and Lula? It wasn't just that they were left, there was a lot of charisma. That was the part of the world where something different was happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, I grew up in Miami, Florida, which is where a huge percentage of the oligarchs of Latin America fled after the pink tide happened. So sort of around the year 2000, Miami had a huge influx of wealthy Venezuelans and Colombians, Brazilians, Argentinians, and it really changed the city. And that was kind of my first introduction to these figures, which was unbelievably negative. I remember it was it was Hitler, and then Chavez was 1 millimeter below.
From right-wing Venezuelans I've met, I thought it would be more
yeah, Hitler was okay, had some good ideas.
Hitler!
Yeah.
Chavez. Hitler.
But it really is a remarkable thing that happened because it wasn't preordained that it should have gone that way. Latin America's history is one of, it's a very tragic one, largely thanks to my people, the Spaniards. We don't talk about that.
He's a real Spanish person. It's okay, guys.
Yeah.
It's all right.
But it
Latinx.
was. Yeah, I'm not Latinx. I can't. That's a touchy subject. We can't talk about that. But seriously. But yeah, it wasn't. It was definitely not preordained that was going to go that way. It could have easily you could have easily seen all these militaries come and just take power again, which they had done throughout the 20th century several times. But there was such a mass mobilization, such a large popular movement that even the militaries couldn't come in and overturn it. It was really a remarkable thing, and we could talk about their mistakes, and there's been many, and we can discuss it, but at the end of the day, like you said earlier, Lula lifted 40 million people out of poverty in Brazil. Overall, in Latin America, the pink tide lifted 70 million people out of poverty since 2002. That's pretty good.
When you talk about the mistakes, that's what's interesting, right? Because what is the actual mistake? It's very comfortable for people to go at the ones that went in a more, I don't really know what the right word to use, but a more heavy-handed direction, right? And then on the other hand, a guy like Lula, who really he created a win-win, and then others kind of straddled the middle, but it's what was the actual mistake, right? Was it because the ones that were tougher are more resilient in power? Well, not in Brazil, though I think the DOJ definitely helped this process happen for sure. They funded, yeah, absolutely. Lava Jato is definitely a U.S.-backed thing. There's sanctions in Venezuela, and the coup in Honduras started all of it in 2009.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the United States has been behind repression and anti-democracy in Latin America since the United States has existed, since the beginning. But I mean, the biggest obvious mistake, it's hard to call it a mistake because it's an incredibly difficult thing to overcome, is the sort of the over-reliance on resource extraction, on commodities, right? I mean, most of the pink tide successes came on the backs of a giant commodities boom in the 2000s, right? Oil, copper, soy, all these things. Latin America has incredible resources, and for these countries and for these leaders, it's they're sitting on this gold mine, and it's just it's so tempting to just rely on that rather than develop native industries and all these things. And
colonized economy, right?
Yeah. I couldn't quite hear it.
Yeah, okay.
but yeah, I mean, and it's obviously easy to say that from where we're sitting, but that's the real kind of tragedy of Latin America, the real kind of curse that will always follow Latin America is how do you move beyond resource extraction as your main economic engine? Because if you keep doing that, then you are always at the whim of international markets.
And also that same colonial domination.
Absolutely.
Because the conduit is all of those commodities.
Absolutely.
And raw materials. Going back to like, I mean, do you remember when you first read, and you don't have to have read, like I haven't read much, right? But I know like when you first read about the coup in Guatemala against Arbenz in the 50s, right? And you got like, first of all, this is fucked up because this is literally where the phrase banana republic comes from.
Yeah.
Like they're literally saying this country is a subsidiary of what was the company?
The
name?
United Fruit Company.
The United Fruit Company.
Current day Chiquita Banana.
Right, Chiquita.
Yeah.
And Arbenz comes into power in the 50s, more on that Lula end, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
guys, like, we're still gonna have elections. I'm gonna do some land reform. You can't just pillage this country totally.
Yeah, and the land reform in Guatemala he wasn't even expropriating productive land in Guatemala that belonged to the United Fruit Company. It was only land that was unproductive. It was just sitting there, doing nothing.
This is land reform in South Africa right now, by the way. And when you see those like big right-wing fear campaigns, because South Africa's become like a global talking point for white supremacy right now.
Oh yeah.
But that's exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about unused, unproductive land from corporate conglomerates, essentially. You remember, we have Milton Alamati on the show sometimes, who's awesome. He's this amazing journalist. I learned so much from him, but I was like, just to be clear, like you're not talking about small like Afrikaner farms. And he's
Right.
like, he's like
Some yeoman Afrikaner going like,
right, exactly.
I'm gonna hoe this land or whatever. Yeah. I don't know how
Yeah. Get on the
how
land.
they do farm with beer.
Yeah.
It's like
Get on the land.
rugby.
What do you see happening there now, though? Like with the right dominant, and also like, is there? I mean, you still have not only do you. I mean, Venezuela is absolutely complicated. I think the most basic position is opposing U.S. coup mongering there. Period. That's the bottom line. But Evo Morales is still actually delivering a lot in Bolivia.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when Evo Morales was first elected, and it was like in the Western media. I mean, there was no bigger laughingstock. I mean, I remember in Miami there was a radio show that it was famous for impersonating like political leaders and then prank calling them. Like they prank called Hugo Chavez, and they prank called at the time the president of Spain, a guy named Zapatero. But they prank called Evo Morales, pretending to be the president of Spain and like offering all this stuff and like, you know, like embarrassing him and stuff, and like everyone had a good laugh. And like Evo Morales has outlasted them all. The first native democratically elected leader in Latin American history, and Bolivia's economy has grown, I think, like something like 42% since Evo Morales took power. So it's an unqualified success of the guy who like no one gave a shot, like no one.
He was the head of the Cocoa Farmers Union. And he became, and he's an indigenous leader who was universally mocked and disrespected. And he's an unqualified success from Bolivia, which doesn't even have like that much of a strategic position to resist U.S. pressure from.
Absolutely.
And it's been constant on him.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, like Bolivia still relies on resource extraction largely for but he's been a little bit smarter than some of the other ones. He has a more diversified economy than say Venezuela, which is like largely relying on oil, and that's really at the heart of the crisis is the collapse in oil prices. But
that's how you would frame like what are your thoughts on Venezuela, real quick?
My thoughts on Venezuela are that it's a legitimate crisis. It's a legitimate humanitarian crisis. There is a huge amount of suffering in Venezuela. It's like I don't think it's useful to deny that. It is Maduro is kind of a just a kind of whatever guy. He's not he's nowhere near the political talent that like Chavez or Lula or Evo Morales is. But you also you cannot accept for 1 second, the mainstream narrative about it that this guy Juan Guaido just declares himself president after cutting a deal with Mike Pence, in which they told him like, oh yeah, just I'll declare myself president, you'll recognize me, and then tomorrow the military leaders will just like come to my side, and then it's gonna be good. And then none of that happened.
I'm the mayor of LA.
What?
Yeah. Get Carcetti, get out of here. I take that job.
This is one of the struggles, right? Is when you're talking about trying to build left-wing governments in Latin America, is the power of the international finance community when it comes to cracking down. Because do you know what? No one in the United States, except for some people on the left, are very worried about this pig, Bolsonaro, who wants to privatize as much of that economy as possible. Versus Maduro, who might not be the most capable, generational talent politically, right, is trying to maintain some forms of very hard-fought victories in Venezuela.
There is no doubt in my mind, without any, I agree, you don't whitewash Venezuela, you don't whitewash Maduro, but if your perspective is coming from primary concern for poor people or unions or indigenous people, already Brazil is in a deeper crisis for those people than Venezuela is. Just definitionally.
It drives me crazy to see like Bloomberg News or The Economist or what I think it was like yesterday, the day before, in Time Magazine's 100 most important people, whatever. Bolsonaro was one of them.
With fucking
Ian Bremmer, who is like a liberal, like very respected liberal geopolitical analyst or whatever from like some think tank bullshit.
No, he runs a private.
He's an editor at large.
He runs a private consultancy called
Eurasia Group.
Eurasia Group.
Yeah.
And they advise
My
banks,
Asia Group? It could be your
advise
Asia
on
Group.
political risk.
He's a Davos whisperer.
He's a Davos
yes.
whisperer. He's one of these guys that's job is to go to rich...
Like Aspen Ideas Festival,
Yes.
be like, you know what we really need is, we really need to deregulate the economies of Sudan, Burundi, and Brazil, obviously, and then you will see democracy flourish in all these places, and good things will happen, and yeah, that's great.
I'm gonna post... Oh, you got the tweet?
I got the tweet.
Yeah, read this shit.
Ian Bremmer says, this is of Bolsonaro, a poster boy for toxic masculinity.
Whoa!
And Brazil's best
Woke.
chance in a generation to enact economic reforms.
Economic reforms.
That is the distillation. But that's the perfect... Like, he's concerned enough to be like, I better throw some fucking woke nonsense into this before I endorse like one of the most horrific people on the planet. Because the bottom line is, I don't care if he's literally, in fact, they need to strip protections for indigenous people because that's how they look at the Amazon. But like, I don't care that he, the stuff that would offend people like Ian Bremmer, like Bolsonaro said, I might prefer my kid to die than be gay. So I have to be like, oh, well, that's terrible. But you know what? He might slash people's pensions. What were you saying about how amazing my show was?
Your show's amazing, but it's worth insisting upon the fact that Bolsonaro makes Donald Trump look like a well-respected, sober statesman.
Makes Donald Trump look like Hillary Clinton.
He really does. Yeah. And the business press and a lot of the liberal press are like, yeah, he might say some crazy things every once in a while, but like that all those poor people that made all those gains in Brazil, they're gonna reverse all that, and that's gonna be good.
The Michael Brooks Show rocks.
Sound man. All right, I love it.
No, but like this is why it's so important, though. When you talk about Bolsonaro, you talk about what's going on in Venezuela. We're talking about Bolsonaro and the relationship with the DOJ. That why it's important not only for us to be recognizing what's going on in Latin and South America, but also to be working as hard as we can to elect left-wing governments of the United States to be challenging the American imperialist complex, because there is a right wing in that part of the world. And they are powerful, and we shouldn't whitewash and be so focused on America that we can't recognize that there's right wing. But that right wing is so powerful because they have the United States military, the United States finance, and the United States military power.
The
and that's why we
International
need-
Monetary Fund.
Exactly.
World Bank.
World Bank, IMF.
And that's why it's so important for us to be, a part of these movements for liberation.
You asked Anna like what she was optimistic about, and she said that like Bernie has a like legitimate shot of winning the Democratic nomination, winning the White House. Right? Like it's not a slam dunk, but it's possible. And Jeremy Corbyn has a legitimate shot of winning the prime ministership, the absolute boy in the UK. And maybe I'm being slightly naive, but like I feel like if those two things happen at the same time, you'll just see cascading benefits all over the third world. Mostly because just, two of the largest capitalist economies in the world will just kind of just get out of the way of all these people in the third world who've been trying to make a change for decades and have always been thwarted by the international power structure led by the United States.
No, that's exactly. In the last couple of minutes, though, before everybody comes up on stage for the contest.
Thank you.
We as the audience love your soup choice.
I can't take it. It's like, Waz is the only person on earth that breaks me. What do you see parallels between people like the Sanders and Corbyn moment of today, then with the pink tide when they rose to power in the early aughts?
Absolutely. I mean, the pink tide really came about after about 10 years before, in the early 90s, there was a huge in the 80s there was a big Latin American debt crisis, which was followed by a giant push toward neoliberal economics, austerity, whatever you want to call it, which is about exactly what happened 10 years ago after the financial crisis in the Western world, where there was a giant economic collapse, imposition of austerity, especially in the UK, but also in the United States. And it's not surprising that about 10 years after that, you're starting to see the rise of left-wing governments, as well as left-wing politicians, as well as right-wing politicians. And the question is, who's going to win? Are we going to?
That's the question. Left is best.
Because it's not going to be Cory Booker.
It's not going to be Cory Booker. That we know.
Some other bullshit, whatever, in the UK. I don't even know who that would be.
Waz really hates Cory Booker.
Yeah. And Cory Booker's fake drug dealer friend, T-Bone.
Yeah. We don't like T-Bone.
My favorite sort.
I kind of like Herman Cain.
I'm a 999 guy.
All right, so here's what we're going to do. Nando. Waz. Go get some water and come over this way. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Nando, stay right here.
Stay right here.
Nando, you're fucking amazing. I appreciate you so much. The range from the World Cup to the IMF. No one's doing it better than Nando Vila.
It's honored
to work with you, man. You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.